I grabbed hold of the interpreter, I shoved him in the bottom of the steps, I pulls my pistol out, I shoved it in his fucking mouth, and I says to him, what the fuck is going on? And what the fuck is going on translates across the fucking world, alright? It doesn't matter now what language I've said it in. He knows he knows I need to know what's going on here, right? Pistol in his mouth, finger on the trigger, what's going on, I need to know. Oh, it's Islamic Jihad. Tell me more. What do they want? And the response hit me in the chest like a fucking lightning bolt. He looked at me straight in the face with a pistol in his mouth and went, you.
What theatre of operation was this mission?
It was in the Middle East and Gaza in particular, but we spent a little bit of time in the West Bank as well. So we were there for a while.
Who were you working for?
So the job had been sponsored by 4 countries. I believe it was the USA, Canada perhaps, UK and the Netherlands, and it was called the Quartet. And they were answerable to the United Nations, and the United Nations were trying to broker a deal in Gaza itself.
What was the mission?
So the mission was to train a border force on the Gaza-Israeli border through a crossing point called Karni to receive goods into the strip and let goods come out from the strip as well. So sort of like a two-way thing. And they needed to bring the border force in and get them trained by a credible force who could basically verify the people that were on the other side. There was a massive distrust between the Israelis and the Palestinians, as you can imagine, and they wanted someone to go in there and basically build up the levels of the Palestinian side so that they could be understood by the Israelis and a rapport could be built.
Who were the parties involved?
So when you look at it, the parties involved with this were the United Nations, the Quartet, which was 4 nations, obviously the Palestinians and the Israelis. Now, the whole thing was being controlled by Condoleezza Rice, who at the time was, I think, Secretary of Defense or something like that, Foreign Affairs for the United States of America. I'm not going to go into the politics because you would need a brain like a small planet to even start to imagine what was going on over there, all right? But needless to say, my part was to be involved with the United Nations as a training team, and the training team had to emanate from somewhere other than the Middle East, is what they wanted. Breaking down the parties involved even further, if you look on the Palestinian side, there were 2 parties. There was Hamas and there was Fatah. And Fatah were in power. And Fatah were manageable. They weren't on the axis of evil, as Hamas are, and they were deemed by the Israelis as trainable enough to get them into a situation where they could work together. So Hamas, on the other hand, were very much on the fringes, but always a permanent threat and always there.
Was it an official military tasking?
No, although in Israel itself and as part of the Quartet, the British were involved, and to that end there was a colonel on a desk who sat overseeing things. They didn't want to commit anybody from a Pacific country onto the ground for political reasons. And I don't understand what the political reasons were, but the British said, you're not having our soldiers. The Americans said, you're not having ours. And the other countries the same. Myself, being a contractor, well, that was deemed fair game. So it didn't matter that I was British, but it would have mattered if I'd have been a British soldier.
Who was in your team and how many?
There was 4 people in the team. There was a guy, I'm not going to go into names, but there was a team leader who was already part of the United Nations. He was a Brit. There was myself. There was another Brit with a similar background to me. And there was an Australian copper.
What roles did you all have?
The roles within the team, obviously team leader. And then very much they were broken down in not so much roles, but responsibilities. And the responsibilities were based around training. And these changed throughout the job. So initially, when we were looking to put the training team in, All they wanted was some basic drills putting in place, but it soon became apparent in the early days that we needed to run an officer's cadre. So we went to Jericho and we ran an officer's cadre so that when we got on the ground in Gaza itself, we had a core of Palestinian people around us who could assist us and help us and be the leaders over there. So the officers' training took place in a place called Jericho. We based out of a hotel which was disused, and we actually trained them in the surrounding grounds of the hotel. There was a small military barracks there, and we used some of their facilities. It was interesting. It was a difficult job because just getting those people from A to B, getting people out of Gaza and getting them to Jericho in itself was a massive mission. All right, you don't understand, the constraints of this job were insane from start to finish. But sure enough, the first part of the job, or the first phase, was to train a small corps of officers, and we did so. We actually were visited by the British colonel on a number of occasions, and we managed to get them to a place where they were acceptable to us as being able to help us to train the Palestinians proper when we got over there.
How many headcount did you have to work with?
I can't remember exactly how many people we had, but we had around 10. It was around 10, and a couple of them failed and a couple of them left, and but I think we finished with about 6 or 7 that were hardcore, that we deemed were good enough to be our team when we got over there.
What kit were you issued?
Right, this is where it becomes really, really ambiguous. So the United Nations themselves gave us nothing. The quartet gave us nothing in particular. However, the Dubai gave us some vehicles, and I think somewhere else, maybe from Saudi, some few bits and pieces came. Kit was a massive issue from start to finish. The Palestinians didn't have anything. It was really difficult for them to muster things like uniforms and all that sort of stuff. Eventually, I think the quartet did step in and managed to find us some uniforms, and some bits and pieces came. Logistically, it was an absolute nightmare because anything that came obviously had to go into Gaza. The Israelis wanted to pick through it before it went anywhere. It had to be sanctioned. It had to be looked at. It had to go through 50 desks just to get a jumper. Do you know what I mean? It was absolutely insane. It was incredible. So it was, luckily for myself, something I didn't get too involved in, and I worked with what I'd got. And I wasn't that bothered because, coming from a British soldier's background, we're used to having nothing. In fact, we thrive with nothing. So I was quite happy that, if you told me I had nothing, well, that's what I've got to work with. And anything more than that's going to be a massive bonus. So that's the way I looked at it, really. By the time we actually took the job properly into the Gaza Strip, we had a few vehicles, but we had no camp. We had no permanent base. And the job very nearly got called off. And when I went in, the second time I went across the border, which again was an absolute nightmare, and I won't go fully into it here, but you had to have clearances, you had to go through these great big silos to get there. It was like you were being treated as a piece of kit as opposed to a person getting over there. But when we got over there on the second time, we realised we don't have anywhere to base. And the Israelis were really stringent about where we could be. So they basically said to us, look, you can train in there, but we want to be able to see you at all times. We want to be able to have cameras on you, whatever you do the whole time. So our options of just going into Gaza and saying, right, that warehouse there will do, we'll take that over, were shut straight away. So there was an area which had a small roof on it. And I found some shipping containers and said, look, whose are these shipping containers? And they said, well, I don't know. They've been there for years and they were empty. So we basically shrouded an area off with these shipping containers underneath this big roof. So it was almost like an amphitheatre to the Israelis' cameras so that they could look in at what we were doing. But the people from the Gaza Strip couldn't see what we were doing. And indeed, we couldn't afford to be seen what we were doing either, because as soon as there was Western people training Fatah, other fractions within Gaza were getting really irate about it. The likes of Islamic Jihad, the likes of Hamas, were getting extremely worried that Fatah were getting all this training from Western influenced sources. Indeed, while we were on a recce, Jack got shot at. Rounds came across the compound on more than one occasion. So it wasn't the given that we were going to get away with this, but we did manage to find somewhere to train with these containers. And it wasn't something I'd never done before. So I've built camps out of containers before. So, I learned in the regiment years ago, if there's a will, there's a way. And there was certainly a will with this one. And there's always a way. So like I say, we found these containers and we built our own camp, which was in its like I say, more or less just a shield from the Gaza Strip so that the Israelis to look in. And then a case was of just getting to that camp every day. We weren't allowed to stay in Gaza Strip. We had to come out every night. So basically, they had these great big iron gates, and then a great big compound, and then on the other side, iron gates. On one side were the Israelis, on the other side were the Palestinians, and in the middle would be wherever was going backwards and forwards across the border, and that was what we were trying to get open. But for the time being, the only stuff going through here was the team. So the Israelis would search us. They'd open these gates, they'd shove us in this silo. We'd sit there in this great big open space. We'd then wait for the Palestinians to get the nod from the Israelis that we were in there, because they weren't allowed cameras to see what was going on. They'd get the nod that we were in there. They'd then open the gates their side. We'd be allowed through. Again, the Palestinians would then search us. We'd then be taken on to task. We'd carry out a day's work or whatever it was, and then we'd come back. Same procedure again. We'd have to notify the Israelis that we were at the gate by a sat phone. The Israelis would see us on the camera, acknowledge that we were there. They'd open the silo. We'd get put back in. We'd then wait in there for what would always seem an eternity. We'd come out the other side. The silos would open. They'd let us out. We'd get searched and debriefed by the Israelis. So just, if you can imagine, just getting in and out for a day's work was probably a 4 or 5 hour procedure without doing your day's work. And we were only allowed in there during the hours of light. So we couldn't go in there during the hours of darkness. So you were constricted to the time. The whole thing was an absolute nightmare. But we did conduct a cadre whereby we trained probably 40 to 50 troops and brought them up to a half decent standard. And, you know, we did things like basic fitness. We did search techniques. We did a bit of drills. We did some drills with them so that they understood, you know, if they were attacked, how they could respond and that sort of stuff. So it was very basic. It was kept on a level. We were never allowed to use live weapons. So all the time we were in there, we were using cardboard cutouts for weapons and all that sort of stuff. So there was all sorts of restrictions on us, but we did manage to get these troops trained to a certain level with what we had. Certainly it was getting to the stage where the Israelis were going to allow them to open up the border and start sending goods to and fro, which was the aim of this objective, was to open the border in a way where all parties were happy that the stuff wasn't going to be coming and going, wasn't going to be laced and blowing people up and all that sort of stuff. So it was a trust building exercise basically, and the first layer of this thing was to get in there and for them to be trained and verified by a team of people independent to the whole area. So that's what we were doing basically.
And what training did you receive?
The training was awesome. It was really good, and we got them to a position where it was acceptable for the Israelis to open the crossing point. However, locally within Gaza, we disjointed the noses of Hamas, who didn't agree with they were called the Presidential Guard, who didn't agree with the Presidential Guard receiving outside source training and all that sort of stuff. They were unhappy with the fact that they were opening the border crossing point because they saw them as sort of like going hand in glove with the Israelis, which was a complete no-no to Hamas. We'll talk about Hamas a little bit later on, but their ideologies don't include anything to do with Israel whatsoever. They don't include anything to do with the Western world, really. And hence, Hamas were placed on the axis of evil by the Bushes or whoever it was in America who placed all these organisations on the axis of evil. They were deemed as people that were non-negotiable and couldn't be dealt with. And I would actually, to a point, agree with that. But further on in this story, we'll tell you how I actually did have to do something with them. So they weren't completely non-obla. About a couple of months into the training, things were going quite well. The border point was beginning to receive, send and take goods in and out, and things were going swimmingly, and we thought this whole plan was going to work. And obviously Hamas wanted to throw a spanner in the works, and they royally did. They basically staged what could only be described as, I suppose, a military coup. They overthrew by force the government and President Abbas, who was in at the time. They overthrew him by force, took control of the strip, and then executed anyone loyal to that regime who they could find. They certainly executed the guys that we trained, or a good proportion of them. I think a few of them survived, but basically anybody who'd been anything to do with the Carney project, which was the project on the border, was murdered and summarily executed in the street by means of, you kneel down over there and you'll now receive an OBE, one behind the ear, although it was more like a burst behind the ear to each one because they walked up and down and they killed them. And I know what they did because a video got sent, and I got eyes on the video, which came via my email, of them actually murdering all these guys that were loyal to Abbas and loyal to the Presidential Guard and Fatah. So they made a massive statement, a huge statement. We're not just gonna take over the Strip, but see those guys that have been trained. Well, they've been taken out as well as a result of this. So, as far as that border point being open, well, that was shut overnight. That was closed overnight. We were never to return as the United Nations. We were told, that's it, you're done. You're not going in again. There's no way you can go in. There's nothing you can do about the blokes that have been killed. And the Israelis stepped up a massive bombing campaign in response to what was happening in the Strip. They bombed some key locations, and I think they also bombed the power station at a place called Deir al-Balah. Now, they completely destroyed that power station to the point that it didn't work. It wasn't completely flat packed, down to the ground, but the key parts of it didn't work anymore. And within, a couple of months, Gaza basically was on its knees again. It needed power. Humanitarian crisis was looming, all that sort of stuff. The goods had stopped coming and going. The place was in absolute fucking turmoil again. It was insane. So what happened next was Hamas obviously needed to speak to people, and it came about that they needed the power station up and running. They had to avoid an absolute humanitarian catastrophe. They needed a power station up and running. Now, the only people capable of repairing the power station were a team of engineers from Sweden, and they weren't prepared to go in there unless they had with them a team of people to look after them who weren't from that area. They didn't. Hamas said, "Oh, we'll look after you," and these engineers went, "Oh yeah, I'm sure you will." They weren't going in there on their own. There's no chance they were going in there. So the shout was put out via the UN, who can go in with these people? And the only military experienced people at the time with anywhere near the paperwork required to get into the Gaza Strip was the same team who just trained the last lot, who'd been murdered by Hamas. So it came back across through my mate, it came back across through him, and now a completely civilian contracted company. I'm not going to say the name of the company, but they basically, the job was farmed out, but it couldn't go through the UN because there could be no support of Hamas whatsoever. So the job went through a private military company now. And basically they asked and said, look, can the team that was in there go back in with these Swedish engineers as their sort of like inner ring of protection? We'd be given some members of Hamas as our outer cordon, and then Hamas wider would look after us while we were in there. And it was bizarre because we knew that Hamas knew who we were. There was no chance they didn't. They would have studied meticulously the paperwork that had come and gone before or that they'd stolen. They would know who we were, what we were doing with Fatah. That's obviously how the footage ended up coming across our desks, etc., etc. This was dangerous. In terms of fucking danger, this was double fucking dangerous. This was ridiculous. This was stupid. In fact, to a point that, if you'd have been serving, even in the regiment I served in, people would have been thinking twice about doing this, because it was almost like saying, hey, reference the guys that, yeah, we did that, but we will come back in and you can look after us, all right? So we said, yes, we'll do it. We obviously fucking named our price. It was a well-paid job, I can tell you that. I'm not going to tell you how much, but it was paid for properly. And sure enough, we put provision and plans in place to go back in. Now, the normal way we were going in before through the borders was now not open to us. So we had to go in through a different crossing. I think it was was it Erez, or it was one of the other crossings anyway, which was the civilian crossings. And all our diplomatic stuff had gone. There was no diplomatic plates on vehicles to get us in and out anymore. There was no diplomatic immunity coming in through the silos. We now had to go in as civilians through what can only be described as the tunnels. And the tunnels were honking. They were disgusting. It was like, it was at best disgusting, at worst double disgusting. It was honking. It was. You had to go through. The Israelis gave you a thorough glove inspection before you went into these tunnels. You were properly searched. Everything that was going with you was searched. You then got put through a series of gates. Every gate had a camera on it, and every gate had a period of time and a speaker where you were held. You were asked to do stuff. and then you would move on and move on and move on until you got further down and down this chain of sort of like, it was like a corrugated tunnel. Some of it was above ground, some of it was underground. But coming the other way were casualties from Gaza. So you'd suddenly go through another gate, and you'd be in there with a body on a stretcher, and it'd be like. And I remember one. I'm looking at it thinking, and it's got like a blood-soaked rag over the top of it, and I'm thinking, what the fuck is under that? It's minging. It's proper, and I'm like, and thinking to myself, the reason that they do this is to eliminate the threat of a suicide bomber. So I could now be sat in this room with this blood-stained thing on a trolley, which is actually a bomb. And he could clack off any time he wants. So every time you had someone coming the other way, you were thinking to yourself, I hope they fucking search this one. Do you know what I mean? Because if he clacks off because he's now got a round iron with him, I'm in a lot of trouble. So it was proper. I remember that just on its own coming and going. You were like, this is insane. This is ridiculous. So we did get through to the other side. And as we came out the other side, we were to be met by like a cab that was going to take us down onto the border, and then there were going to be some vehicles that we'd managed to borrow off the UN with inside Gaza to take us to the compound. On the first day there, as we came out the other side, we came through the last Israeli checkpoint on the gate, and we sort of opened this thing, and I remember we walked out onto what was like no man's land. It was just a desert landscape. It was like dead. And, you know, you see the rubble of Gaza over here and a few bits and pieces and a couple of buildings in the distance. And you could see our vehicles that we were going to, and someone was going to come and get us from here. But we started to walk across this, like, no man's land. And as we did, the first round come over the top of our heads. And I remember it. Over it went the first round. And we're like, right, that's not for us. But it's being fired at the Israelis. So Israelis fired back at whatever it was. And then before we knew it, there was a pipe bomb had gone, or something had come across, and we're now in this no man's land, and there's like a hail of stuff going this way, a hail of stuff coming that way. There's stuff going off all over the place, and I went to run into a divot in the ground, and I remember one of the lads yelling, "No, don't," because as soon as I moved towards this divot, it got lit up by someone. And I'm thinking to myself, right, and I looked behind and I could see my mate was just stood there with his hands up like this, as if to go, this isn't our fight, please don't shoot us, all right? So now the whole team are just stood in this area with their hands up in the air like that, going, right, okay, this will finish one day, hopefully. And there's rounds going everywhere. And it's like, they weren't shooting at us, but it was just such a surreal thing to be stood in the middle of a firefight without a weapon, thinking to ourselves, right, okay, hopefully this will end long enough, and, you know, everything around us had been shot up, and, you know, eventually we got to the other side. But what an absolute introduction to Gaza was. Yeah, thanks. Cheers for that. Nice one. We got to the other side. We got picked up and we got taken to the power station. Now, we had to have a couple of meetings with Hamas, etc. And we had to go and see them. And the whole thing was bizarre. We went down to what used to be the old headquarters. We met with a few of them. They issued us with some Makarov pistols, these old Russian pistols, and I remember thinking to myself, there's no chance these are ever going to fucking work, like, do you know what I mean? And there's no chance they're going to give us enough bullets to give them a test fire either. So, you know, they might as well have given me a rock to put in my pocket, do you know what I mean? That's what we had. When we got back to the camp, obviously we had these weapons on us. We had an outer circle. So if you can imagine a power station, on the outside of it, on the main gates, you had like these young Hamas soldiers, and we were to look after the engineers on the inside. So we controlled them between the actual power station itself and the accommodation for the power station itself, which was inside another compound inside the compound. So two big compounds. Power station, accommodation block, and a road going between the two, a Perry track going around the whole thing, and every gate had troops on it, and surrounding the whole area were troops at various places, which we got to find out about later on when I started going out and actually having a look to see what they were doing to protect us. In the meantime, you know, we had a guard room to run. We had our own guard, which also encompassed the guard on the gate. So we had to try and control that. So my job really was a glorified guard commander. And then the other half of the job was to look after the engineers. So somebody from the team would permanently be with the engineers, and the engineers would only be allowed to be at the same time at the same place so that we could keep them together. And we had provision in place whereby if it all went completely wrong, we had these UN vehicles and we could bomb burst out the back. But just to put things into perspective, if something goes wrong in Gaza, there is nowhere to fucking run away to, because you can't run back over the border because you're completely fenced in. So if somebody's coming after you with inside Gaza, you've got to actually hide from them. But not being local, you've got to hope that somebody shows enough pity on you to let you hide in their place in the first place. So we had a United Nations building, which was sort of our plan to get back to there, and then hopefully raise enough interest from the Israelis to come and rescue us if we needed that. And that really was, the plan to save our skins if things went completely Pete Tong. Now, during our stay there and during the repair of this place, so much happened. It's just, it's ridiculous. I don't know where to start with it. It's like every day there was a drama with something. I mean, from the very first day. So the very first day we had breakfast, and I went in to see the cook bloke, and he was a local, and he says, "What would you like for breakfast, Saeed Phil?" Saeed being Mr. Phil. They used to call me all Saeed Phil. And I'm like, well, knowing you lot, bacon and eggs is off the fucking question, isn't it? Like, do you know what I mean? So that ain't going to happen. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, all right, just toast and marmalade. Marmalade? No marmalade. Toast? Toast, yeah, you can have toast. Jam? We'll do jam. All right, jam. What is marmalade? No marmalade. No, okay, so we get toast and jam for breakfast. Not a problem. Dinner time, they had no food whatsoever. So dinner came round, they had no food. So the chef says to me, I'm going to disappear downtown and get you some scoff. It took so long that we went to bed. But when he came back, he made such a commotion that when he came to my bedroom door, I actually answered it with my pistol under a fucking towel and like jabbed it straight into his chest because I thought he'd come in to attack me. And my mate did the same, he answered the door. So you couldn't trust anybody there, is the point I'm trying to get here. You couldn't trust anybody. He made a massive deal of that. He fell out with us. He didn't want to work for us anymore. Eventually, we sort of like managed to talk him around. We're the foreigners here. We have to look after ourselves. We're armed. That's the way it is. If you knock on my door in a panic and start yelling at night, I'm coming out with a weapon. I'm not coming out, with my pillow. All right, I'm coming out with a weapon. He got it to a point, but we fell out with that guy. You had things like next to the camp. Now we had a United Nations flag because they did say we could put that on there, but purely so the Israelis could identify that there was somebody in there, and we would have taken the flag down if we weren't in there. So we had a bit of a thing going on. The perimeter was attacked on more than one occasion by Apache helicopter. We saw it, we witnessed it. We saw border incursions, we saw tanks coming over, we saw all sorts of activity going on. But we also saw lots of Palestinian activity going on as well. A guy one day, we were sat in the garden, massive boom, bang, we're like, what's that? Went outside, it went a load of pink mist, just complete pink mist and a divot in the ground and a boot and a bit of flesh and something else honking on top of the guard room, and I'm like, what the fuck was that? And one of these locals had tried, they had these little tubes called Qassams, these little rockets, and he basically tried to set off his Qassam next to the guard room because he thought that would be the safest place to do it in case, because they wouldn't be looking at him there, and boom, he blew himself up a bit. It went off on the pod instead of flying through the sky, and that was all that was left of him. So you had this sort of like stuff going on all the time. It was a daily occurrence that something stupid would happen, or you'd see the Israelis flying over, or you'd hear some shooting down the road. It was non-stop, and we didn't get the feeling from Hamas that they actually trusted us, because they wouldn't give us weapons and all that sort of stuff. So one of their commanders came to see us and said, look, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want, they were basically trying to get more and more control within the camp, and we said, no, you can't have that control. And they're saying, why? Who are you working for? Why are the Israelis telling us we can't do this and can't do that? We don't trust you. And it's like, okay, what can we do to make you trust us? And I came up with the idea, well, I'll go on a patrol with you. I'll go on a patrol. Next time you go on a patrol out around your troops, I'll come with you. Me and another lad will come with you, and we'll show we'll give you a sort of like a show of strength, a show of loyalty, a brethren. We'll come out with you. Which obviously was an extremely fucking dangerous thing to do, because if that patrol does get picked up by, a drone, or, the Israelis are watching, they could have blown us to smithereens. We could have been absolutely smashed off the planet for doing that. But we said, right, to build this trust, we'll do it. So we jumped. They come and picked us up in a gun truck. I've got a picture of the gun truck somewhere. They picked us up with a gun truck. Couple of young lads on the truck, big old gun on the back. And we drove around these various little outstations, and it was really interesting actually, because as we drove around, they explained to us, that big mound over there, well, that's full of explosives. If the tanks come, we're going to blow them up. And they showed us a big lead coffin in the ground and said, this is how we hide from the night vision and all that sort of stuff. And it was like, wow, this is amazing. And we went around, and everywhere we went, like, these troops had come out from wherever they were, they're hiding, or if they were sort of like in a camp, they'd come out and they, there's white men on the wagon, like, do you know what I mean? It'd be like, what are they doing? And it was like their faces were like insane. They're like staring at you going, what the? They'd never seen anything like it, ever. But what it did do is they now looked on us in a different way. They were like, well, wow, these guys are prepared to sort of like stand with us. And all right, we didn't go and fight with them against the Israelis. We wouldn't, we'd have to back out if it came to that sort of like stage. But I was prepared to put myself in a position where I ended up in a firefight with them. Do you know what I mean? Just to try and make our stay in there a little bit easier. Because I was getting the feel from these people that at some stage, if anything goes wrong whatsoever, they'll execute us in a moment's heartbeat. Bearing in mind, they still know that we trained that first team. So they would have been thinking to themselves, well, these people are expendable. All we want out of this arrangement is to get the power station up and running. Anyway, it carried on. The job went on. I did come and go a couple of times, so I came in and out a couple of times. Things got a little bit easier on the border. I brought a football strip in from Southampton. I gave it to the local team. There's a picture in FHM magazine of the team, and I put a captions. When I went down to deliver it, I had a pistol down each side and a big knife, and I said it's the most firepower Southampton have ever had up front. Well, the FHM saw it slightly differently. They said these kids have got the most miserable existence on the planet, and this idiot's turned them into Southampton fans. So there was a bit of banter with FHM over it. We got this thing out. We did a bit of hearts and minds with the locals. I used to go on the occasional drive around the local estate and just be seen by people to be being proactive and that sort of stuff, which, by the way, was completely against the fucking rules I'd been given. But I deemed it necessary to keep people from wondering. If they saw us, they weren't wondering. If they didn't see us, what are they up to? Do you know what I mean? We'll let them see you, and then they won't worry about you so much. So we did that. It was a calculated decision that did pay off. The guy that I'd had the argument with, we had a translator, and I fell out with him because he kept telling, you could blatantly see that you'd ask him to tell somebody to do something, and by the way they did it, you could see that he'd told them to do what he wanted and not what you wanted, right? So the bloke was being a complete unreasonable twat about it. So I stood him to in the guard room, and anyway, he sort of like stood up to me as if to go, this is Gaza, this is my town. I fucking backhanded him. Give him a proper fucking backhand. As if to go, I don't give a fuck who you are. You're in my fucking guard room. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, he took it. The people in the guard room sort of like, well, wow, okay, right, Phil is the boss, etc. But he went back to his estate and drummed up a load of trouble. And anyway, at night, we used to go down and we used to check the local guards, the Hamas guys. And they were quite good fun. They were young lads. You'd sit down there, you'd talk with them. They were barking as far as religion went. You was non-negotiable as far as anything to be had talking about Islam or anything like that. They were, they saw what they saw, and it was like talking to someone who'd been completely brainwashed. There was no negotiation around anything to do with religion with them. So we used to sort of like swerve talking about that and maybe talk about David Beckham or something a little more on their radar as being a bit more interesting and outside of Gaza. So, but we would just sort of like gauge if they were happy. Are they content with what they're doing? Do they know what they're doing? Have they got the bases covered? Have we got to worry about them? Is everybody all right? That sort of thing. So it was very much sort of like a welfare check. Anyway, this one night we came out of camp to go down and do this check on these young lads. And when we got down there was no young lads. There was what can be only described as maniacs. All right, they'd replaced these young lads with these geezers, scars on their faces, muscles out here. Replace the AK-47 with a PKM plus RPG, that these geezers were proper tooled up. There was double the guard, and they were tooled up to the eyeballs. They were properly like, fucking hell, these guys. And you could tell by the look of them, these men would have a row. These were your fighters. These were people that were there not to make me feel good, but to actually do some work. So when we got back into camp that night, we sat round as a team, and I said, look, me and my mate who'd been down there had seen this and gone, right, the demographic has changed here. There's a threat against us big time within Gaza itself, because these geezers are serious. They've got some proper lumps here, some proper soldiers, some proper operator, warrior types on the gate, all right? You know, big beards, and, you know, you were like, wow, who are these? Where have these been? Like, do you know what I mean? Anyway, we took the engineers back to the accommodation block. We got everybody off to bed. We shut the thing down for the night, made a last check on the guards, came back in, and we used to have a routine where you'd be up at sort of like 6 in the morning, have breakfast, and then get yourself back over the way. By about 5 o'clock, it was just going light, and I heard the first couple of bullets going over the top of the compound, and we're like, right, what's going on? So 2 of us went out to investigate onto the roof, and the rest of the team stayed with the engineers downstairs. And it soon became apparent, yeah, we are being attacked by somebody. I got hold of the interpreter. I tried to ask him who it was. He wouldn't say nothing, so we thought, right, we'll fall back into the compound proper. We'll get everybody together. We'll get them back into where the compound, and we'll execute this plan to get ourselves out of here. So the plan was to RV around the generators where the work was going on, just in case. We'd do a head count there. We'd then have cleared the guard room. We'd then be out of sight of the perimeter fence, so we could make any adjustments, get in the vehicles, and get the fuck out the back gate and try and hide at this compound that we'd identified as friendly, being the UN. So we got the first lot of us over there, and then bizarrely, the Australian copper had forgotten his fucking weapon. He'd left it in the accommodation. I mean, I'm going to be honest, I didn't really get on with the fella from day one, but this sort of like nailed it for me, do you know what I mean? The only time he's ever had to pull his weapon out, and he goes in his pants and all he's got is his cock. Do you know what I mean? It's like, what are you going to do, my friend? You know, you might as well be one of those. Go and sit with them now, you're no fucking use. So, one of the lads sent out to go back and get the weapon, retrieve the weapon, which he did. I went up onto the roof of the power station itself to see if I could get a better picture. And when I got up there, I sort of like walked to the edge of the roof, and sure enough, boom, and the bullets were closing now. And I got pinned on the roof. Every time I went to get back off the roof, I got shot at. So there was obviously somebody sniping that every time. So I was up there for, I don't know how long I was up there for, but for a fair amount. One of the lads had been back to the compound, come back, people were starting to assemble downstairs. I managed to get off the roof. I got downstairs and I got to the interpreter. I did a mad dash across the roof. Proper mad dash across the roof, got down the stairs, got hold of it, and it was just before Christmas. I remember this, it was just before Christmas. I remember running down the stairs thinking, wouldn't it be fucking great if I got killed in time for Christmas? You know what I mean? It's one of those bizarre things that go through your head, like, do you know what I mean? I think the kids would be chuffed with that, they'd be proper chuffed. Ruin their Christmas, wouldn't it? Fucking ruin all their Christmases forever. And I was having a bit of a fucking moment to myself thinking, you fucking twats, you could have waited till New Year's, like, do you know what I mean? Anyway, I get downstairs, I see the interpreter, and I want to know what's going on now, and I'm not fucking about anymore. I've asked him 2 or 3 times nicely. I've said to him what's going on. Now the team leader said to me, go and find out from the fucking interpreter what's going on. I need to know who these people are that are attacking the compound. Are they after us? Are they after Hamas? What is the fucking deal here? So I grabbed hold of the interpreter. I shoved him in the bottom of the steps. I pulls my pistol out. I shoved it in his fucking mouth. And I says to him, what the fuck is going on? And what the fuck is going on translates across the fucking world, all right? It doesn't matter now what language I've said it in. He knows he knows I need to know what's going on here, right? Pistol in his mouth, finger on the trigger. What's going on? I need to know. Oh, it's Islamic Jihad. Tell me more. What do they want? And the response hit me in the chest like a fucking lightning bolt. He looked at me straight in the face with a pistol in his mouth and went, you. And I was like, what? And it had all stemmed from this fucking geezer I backhanded in the guard room. They'd come to take revenge on me personally. Now, if you put this into perspective, I mean, most firefights, every firefight before that I'd ever been in has been because I've been part of an organisation. It hasn't been people coming to get me personally, all right? So that put a new spin on things. A, I'm thinking, fuck me. And then B, I'm thinking, shit, I've put all my fucking mates at risk with this bollocks as well. Like, do you know what I mean? So I'm thinking, right, I'm double interested in getting out of there now and saving the day. So we get everybody on the vehicles. As planned, we go out through the back gates. We get ourselves hidden downtown. And we do get away with it. Now, the interesting thing here was Hamas had quite a battle on the front gate, stopping these people getting in, and held firm. And later on in the day, although Hamas wouldn't tell us, we heard funeral processions going on. Now, we can only assume, and I don't know to this day if it's true, but we think Hamas lost 2 guys defending us that morning. Like I say, they would never admit it to us. They would never tell us. We asked them. We asked the other people involved. We asked locals. Nobody was tell us for sure, but for sure there was 2 funerals that afternoon. And knowing what these people are like over there, they have funerals on the day. They've got 24 hours to get you in the ground. They don't fuck about. It's a religious thing, I think, where they've got to bury them straight away. So they literally, bury these guys straight away. So, for all Hamas were, they did actually stand there and fight. And I think looking at it purely from the warrior aspect, fair play to them. They put a fight up. Do you know what I mean? Whether I agree with their ideologies or not, which I don't, whether I look at them as being on the axis of evil or not, if I look at them purely from the point of view of a man that will stand there and have a fight, well, they fucking did. Do you know what I mean? And they fought with everything they had, literally, because guys piled in. So it was another interesting aspect I'd never really sort of like fully considered before, but now was having to consider, full on. So yeah, it was tight. So we went firm. We then waited for, I can't remember. We must have been in hiding for 2 or 3 days in this compound. And then things calmed down. Hamas got to grips with stuff. Obviously, their noses have probably been put out of joint slightly because they're there to look after us, and we've been chased off the compound. So they were keen to get us back in. We needed some kit and equipment. We also knew that now that we'd had this ruckus, Hamas might take it out on us if they'd lost guys. And once the job was done, I felt that there might be a chance that as soon as the job was done, they'd just let people have their vengeance on us and fuck the team. Who cares? Do you know what I mean? So what we did next was a bit of a stroke. We told them that we needed to go out of Gaza to get some kit and equipment to finish the job, and if we couldn't get out, we couldn't get the kit and equipment. And they asked us, "Oh no, can some of you stay? Can you not close it down?" And we said, "Well, no, we've just been attacked, so we don't want to stay. We don't want to stay here. We want to get out for a bit, and we want to come back in." Now they thought they're thinking to themselves, well, they've got to come back in because we want the power station finished. So they wanted assurances that the power station was going to be finished. So we said, look, we're going to leave our kit and equipment here. You can keep your weapons, but we are going out and we've got to come back in. And the engineers won't go out unless we all come out. So we managed to sort of like get ourselves in a position where we were ready to go out. And basically what the engineers had done was tee it up so that they could phone call when they'd got back out and basically say to Hamas, right, go in there, switch on A, B, C and D and your power station's up and running, and by the way, cheers for the jokes, we're out of here. So we basically done a runner in the end. We just sort of like let them think that we were going out to get some kit and equipment, and then they got a phone call telling them how to turn their power station on, and we never went in again. And now this is in the ether. I can probably never go there again myself anyway. So yeah, my Gaza days are over. And that was it. That was my experience of Gaza. Things I've taken from that experience then. There are some fucking lunatics in the Gaza Strip. There are some people there whose ideologies will never ever be in line with what we find acceptable in our world. It can never be so. There are also some extremely good people in Gaza. Some people who don't deserve how things pan out for them in there. Unfortunately, they're embroiled in it into such a depth that they can't escape because they're sort of like surrounded by this extreme stupidity which goes on, and continues to go on over there. From a soldiering point of view, I saw people soldiering in there. I saw people, who would go the extra mile for their cause. And even though their cause probably wasn't, when they were looking after us, that's not their cause. But they were given a mission, and their mission was to look after us. And they did that. And you can't knock them for that. And I wouldn't knock them for that. They did it extremely well. They couldn't have done it any better. We all came out alive. So, with that respect, they did their job. Would I go back? Nah. Do I fully understand the politics of that region? Well, not a fucking chance. Never. I think if you look at the mission as a whole, my mission at that time was to make a living. I made a living and I managed to get out of there. And that's it, I think. That's where we leave that one.